Hey listeners, here's a quick word about our sponsor, Xometry. They don't make parts, they make outcomes possible. That tiny component you're designing, it's more than a part. It's what powers satellites into orbit, pushes race cars to the limit, and even stabilizes surgical arms. From R&D to final production, Xometry gives you access to the world's manufacturing capacity, so every part, no matter the size, makes a real impact. Start your quote today at xometry.uk and see how one part can change everything.
Is the entertainment sector turning to AI for creativity? Welcome to the latest E+T Off the Page podcast, and today we're looking at how AI is impacting the business of entertainment. My name is Tim Fryer. As always, I'm joined by my colleague Jack Loughran, and our special guest for this episode is Professor Sarah Atkinson, who is Pro-Vice Dean at the Department of Culture, Media and Creative Industries at King's College London. Welcome, Sarah.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So this podcast comes off the back of our issue at the end of last year that marked the centenary of John Logie Baird's first experiments with television in 1925 and 26. Our features, largely from Paul Dempsey, looked at how the technology of the entertainment industry is moving forward. While we'll look at that in more detail and the elements of it, it always seems to keep coming back to AI, doesn't it, Sarah?
Yep, at the moment it's the hottest topic there.
Okay, well, AI can be used at every stage in the digital entertainment process. So let's start with the storytelling to start with. Now, you could argue in the world of sequels, in the film world especially, that once a winning formula has been identified, then they can become, well, pretty formulaic. So does that make it ideal territory for AI?
Yeah, I mean, it has been, and it isn't just in the current moment. If you look at back in 2013 with Netflix and House of Cards, they used an algorithm then to define what would be the most successful format for a series. And it didn't use algorithms then to write the script or to shape the story, but it certainly was, a formula, if you like, that had political dramas being very popular, films directed by David Fincher, and then content starring Kevin Spacey. Obviously, if that algorithm ran again, it would probably come up with something very different.
Not including Kevin Spacey.
Yeah, I would have thought so. Yeah, those types of technologies have already started to be used within those. So algorithms to predict audience behaviours, audience tastes, what's going to be successful, very much are being used to shape content being made.
Okay, well, the obvious conclusion from that is that you might end up, particularly when you start moving into the seventh episode of Fast and Furious or something like that, something that becomes established. Are we just getting the same thing time and time again, or is it always going to require a human touch, the human eye input to give the human touch to any film or script?
Yeah, I mean, it is the worry that content will become homogenized through these tools because, the same thing comes over and over again, and then it's based on synthetic media as opposed to human produced media, if you like. But no, I think there's a big pushback, isn't there? This is what we see with the debate around AI. On one side, there's very much a fear narrative. Everyone's frightened of it taking their jobs, of taking storytelling away, of dehumanization. But then on the opposite scale, you have experimentation and eagerness to use this new tool to actually improve and enhance creativity and to make things that are not possible without AI, but absolutely driven by human creativity at the core. So I think what we'll see, hopefully what we'll see, certainly what we're seeing at the moment still is a huge range of content that, we have to choose from as audience members, which spans that range of, pure digitally created CGI, AI content to humanistic natural forms or, whatever it might be. So I think if we can continue to work along that spectrum, that would be the best outcome for the current situation, and it doesn't go one way or the other.
I feel like the question I have, though, is that when you look at tools like Sora, the output is really, really impressive, like barely distinguishable from traditional filmed content, and it's difficult to tell it apart. And yet, I mean, it will clearly become a tool that's going to be used more and more in filmmaking and TV shows and things like that. But I can't think of any particular examples of where that's actually been used in mainstream TV or film yet. So it's kind of like we're on the cusp of it maybe taking off in a big, big way, but we're not quite there yet. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think the techniques that, Sora is built on, which, there's a feature called Cameo, isn't there, which can take your own image as a person and then, taking the facial data, implant you onto any other scenario that might come from mainstream feature film and so on. So the technology can do that. But the film industry has been using that type of technology, albeit to, a very kind of long-winded approach that required specialist software that was only available to the industry for many, many years. And the key examples are when a actor or performer dies during the filming of a film, and then they have to kind of retrospectively recreate that actor onto scenes that haven't yet been shot. So you had that with 1994, The Crow, Brandon Lee, Gladiator 2000, Oliver Reed, both used CGI to complete the film that hadn't been shot, building up their facial features to look like it was them. But obviously that was quite painstaking, would have taken a big team of compositors and digital effects artists. And the difference now is that's available in the hands of the consumer. That's very same technology. So it's that case of just because you can, do you actually need to? The technology can do those things and has been doing it for a long time, but it's being applied in perhaps the ways that it should be applied and not wholesale over the whole, film production cycle of every film or screen media.
I guess it does raise some morality kind of or ethical concerns. So, I mean, remember a few years ago, there was an advert and it had basically a kind of breakfast at Tiffany's era, Audrey Hepburn selling like coffee or something. I can't remember what it was. I mean, it's actually pre-AI, to be fair. But it does kind of raise a question of, I mean, she certainly didn't, I think she died in the early 90s or something. She didn't give her approval for that. So I feel like, are we at the cusp of also kind of quite a lot of ethical considerations if you're trying to bring back people from the dead using this stuff?
There was another example as well. There was an Orson Welles film that was they lost the first 43 minutes. I forgot what the name was. It's something like the Appletons or something like that. Ambletons perhaps, and they're going to try and recreate that lost 43 minutes just from screen notes, but they've got to recreate the script and all the actors and so on from scratch, from AI, if you like. And apparently the Wells estate was very much against it, I believe, but that doesn't seem to stop people doing these sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few other examples in the entertainment sector, not just in the film sector, like the use of holographic, projections in live performance, with ABBA Voyage being, a key example. But obviously they gave their permission because they're still alive. But I know there was issues. I think there was a proposal to do a similar thing with Amy Winehouse. And obviously there was a huge backlash against that proposal. So I think, the ethical, moral issues are catching up with a technology that is moving very, very quickly. And of course, the legislation, the legal frameworks just aren't there to deal with the use, the nefarious use of these technologies, as we've seen, in the pornographic industry and so on, with deepfakes being the first kind of example of how that could be used wrongly, but then without a legal structure to counter that. But there is one example, I mean, you probably do know the example, do you, of Tilly Norwood, the computer-generated performer that was created by an artist called Aline van der Velden, and that causing huge uproar in Hollywood and being condemned because, she had a sort of advert, a social media account out there, which was a creative experiment, I believe, by the artist, but then caused outrage among performers in Hollywood, thinking this was the start of them, their careers and their profession and their skills being eroded.
I felt like there was quite a lot of hot air around that though, because I mean, they were kind of saying, oh, Tilly Norwood could be, you can kind of rent her out for a film or whatever, will kind of offer her likeness. And one would ask the question, why would we do that? Why would a big film company do that? Why wouldn't they just make their own AI actor? They don't need to use this like Tilly Norwood. It was an interesting kind of example, I guess, because it was maybe the first time that someone has tried to present an AI actor to the world as if they're a star that could appear in multiple different pieces of media. But I mean, the reality is that it hasn't taken off.
More of a creative experiment than a proposition, and I think it surprised the artists behind it that there was such a pushback against this. But of course, that's within the context of the previous writers and actors strikes of 2023, pushing against, AI regulation needing to be established before this onset.
I just wondered, I don't know if you've got any sort of particular insight into this, but I just wondered, do you have an idea about when, say, the next Marvel film might use AI-generated imagery to supplant CGI? generated imagery?
Yeah, it's a difficult one because obviously the industry is heavily cloaked in non-disclosure agreements, and yeah, they're very guarded with what they might be doing. And yeah, again, there's this polarity where you see at the end of film credits of a clear claim being made in the text to say this film has not used AI. It's a badge of credibility, really. So I think there'll be an audience expectation that that should be disclosed so that they are aware when they're watching something how it's been created. And normally you can tell through the long credit listings, that it's been digitally composited, it's used CGI. So I think there would be credits such as AI consultants or AI engineers or whatever that might be. So I don't think it would be something that could be hidden when it happens. But
I was wondering how important that is really, because the film industry is built on the unreal feel like reality. So it doesn't make any difference whether it's using AI or any other cinematic gimmick tool.
yeah, I mean, there's a form of thinking around the creativity and performance creativity about having authentic environments to perform within to get the best performance from those actors. And, it used to be that they'd stand in a green box, the green screen, and not be responding to anything and being asked to use their imaginations to conjure up the images. But then that's been supplanted by virtual production techniques. So they are then surrounded by, pre-visualizations of the environments and the CGI generated characters that they're responding to. And I think that's been very well received. And then you see films like Wicked that made a virtue of building physical sets. They didn't use digital sets. They augmented and enhanced them, but they used very big physical constructions for those performers to work within and around for that authentic performance.
And did that then become a gimmick in its own right for Wicked, as opposed to, they were obviously selling that as a positive?
Yes,
Uh,
yeah.
But was it?
Well, I think
Was it make it a better film?
yeah, and I think you have to look at the overall film and cinema ecosystem that doesn't just rely on selling the film. It relies on selling merchandising and, experiences. The life of the film itself has to live on and generate further, revenue streams and income. So if a physical life-size set is built, I can imagine that could be a feature of a future theme park. For example, we've got Universal Studios opening a theme park in the UK.
Or,
Bedfordshire.
the Harry Potter world. I don't know if it's called Harry Potter world. I mean, I've actually been. That uses all film sets, like stuff that was actually built for the film. And if that was all done in CGI, that wouldn't be there to then become Harry Potter world. Although that's quite a unique attraction, to be fair. So it's not like every film is going to turn into some.
I think, in fairness, Harry Potter world, I mean, it was filmed, some of it in Northumberland and some of the Lake District and things like that. It's not as if they brought the original sets back to Harry Potter world. They still built them for Harry Potter world. I don't think that's what it's called, is it?
Yeah.
But you know what I mean. If it's something successful enough to build a theme park around it, then they'll build it, whether it was the original set or not.
But maybe with, more limited budgets, more, restrictions, they might be thinking of these longer tail opportunities to generate revenue in the future. So that might change with these big franchise properties that have a long lifespan and a big fan kind of community that follows.
Can I skip back to your work at King's College? You work a lot in the research as well as the education side of things. One of your projects is Adapt AI. Is that right? Could you tell us a bit about the work that you're doing there and
Yeah,
where it's going for the future?
of course. I mean, it's probably worth saying a little bit about how I've been researching the film screen industries, cinema, over my career, really. And it's always been looking at these really interesting points of transition where a new technology is introduced and disrupts that in some way, whether it be through how things are made, so the creatives' perspectives, but then how things are watched through audience perspectives and mapping, ongoing patterns. And it's a cycle really about what happens in those moments of innovation. So I've always kind of looked at that as key areas that I'm interested in. So this represents exactly that. Again, we're, going through another cycle of disruption, of innovation, of change. And then there'll be a period when it will settle and things will bed in and we'll see what continues, what sustains, and what's left by the wayside and becomes, gimmicks. You see in cinema that happening quite a lot, that new technologies bring with it these exciting experimentations that don't last very long, like 3D, stereoscopic 3D in the 50s and then again in the 2010s and so on. Researching those areas is really key because obviously lots happens and then it kind of falls away as we move on. So ADAPT AI, which stands for Analysing and Diversifying Audience Participation with Creative Technology and AI, is actually a doctoral training college. So that involves students being trained within that framework, PhD students, but also conducting original and new research into this area of how creative technologies and AI are being adopted by cultural institutions, by the creative industries sector.
It's not looking at the actual or developing the technology, it's looking at how it's implemented and its impact.
Yeah, but we have practice-based elements of that. So it's not just King's College, I should say. It's a consortium working with Guildhall School of Music and Drama and the London South Bank University. So of universities, we have very different expertise and facilities. So students could come, say, to Guildhall and work with performance technologies and techniques in order to creatively experiment and propose new ways that things might be made, but, with a critical eye because it's a research project, it's not a commercial project. So it's a way of looking at research questions around this area critically, but using different types of experimental practice-based methods. So it's really exciting because there could be a whole number of projects going in different directions that is looking at this area as it happens and both experimenting and critiquing the technologies.
Okay, all right. Well, we've looked at the storytelling, particularly in light of the work that you're doing. What about in the production side? Where's the impact of AI there? Because that seems to be where it's really going to find its role.
Yeah, I think in refining and making workflows more efficient, more productive, that's likely where it will come in. It goes back to that example, we talked about using CGI to replace actors' faces and that being previously a very laborious task that involved lots of people probably in different countries working on different aspects by hand, using computer tools to rub out wires to, build faces and so on. That, with AI potentially and can be automated. So that wipes out the need for all of those people, those different technologies. It puts an efficiency in the chain so that money could be invested elsewhere. So it's hugely disruptive in that way because it's putting lots of people who previously had work, out of work and potentially into different types of roles. But you can see with that efficiency then you could imagine then lots more content being made, so lots more choices for audiences because more films don't have such a long production time frame because traditionally post-production is the longest part of a production. The on-set shooting is very short because it's very, very expensive because it involves A-list talent and lots of specialists and lots of equipment, whereas post-production now can be automated computationally. So I see that being probably an outcome of that, more content.
But I take your point on that. In theory, it kind of allows creatives, say people that have an idea for a film, to actually be able to produce it much more cheaply. And it could be a great idea, but just possibly isn't that mainstream an idea and wouldn't therefore get kind of studio acceptance. But because the budgets can be brought down, as you said, you could have much more content. But personally, I already feel like I'm sort of drowning in content even pre-AI. I'm trying to watch all these TV shows and I'm smashing through TV shows every night, but I can't keep up. There's always stuff that I'm like, oh, I haven't even seen that yet. I haven't watched a new series of that. Are we not already at content saturation point? And actually, kind of AI has the potential to increase that tenfold, maybe.
But maybe with that lowering the point of entry, the cost of entry, then with that variety, the good stuff is still going to rise to the top. We've always had that in music or anything else. A good book will end up rising to the top eventually. So maybe that's just opening up the door to more creativity.
Yeah, there's a lot of rhetoric around the democratization of creativity with these new tools, and that's always come when, with digital cinema, the use of portable cameras and no longer having to use film, that really shaped the idea that lots of people could make films because they had access to cheaper shooting equipment. And it happened with virtual production after the lockdown, where the technology really accelerated and could be in the hands of independent filmmakers and creators, using real-time game engines to make films where they don't need studio space or anything. They could work with CGI. And so that was very much, heralded as a moment again where this is democratized, everybody can have access to these, different stories will be told. And as you say, some of that rises to the top, but then there is that then spread of more independent niche content that could talk to different international audiences, different lived experiences. So that choice shouldn't be about, like you say, being overwhelmed with more of the same. Back to the point about homogenization, not the same and same again. It should be about a diversity of content that speaks to a whole range of different audiences where they can see themselves represented and that they can access stories that are about them and not just mainstream narratives.
I mean, I used to watch the Marvel films. I used to watch all of them probably up until, say, I don't know, before Avengers Endgame, which was a few years before that. I was a bit like, do you know what, I'm actually just done with this formula. I don't want to watch this thing again and again. I could probably talk for the next half an hour about how pissed off I am at Marvel films and how they've made cinema really boring. But I mean, I'm relatively alone in it. I mean, yeah, obviously there's criticism of Marvel, but like, it's super successful, the most successful cinema franchise of all time. Do people want this content? Do they want kind of bespoke, more interesting kind of artistic views on the world from relatively niche cinematographers' point of view? Or actually, do people want formulaic stuff like Marvel,
Well, but maybe more people than you think feel like you, Jack, and they are also getting pissed off with Marvel and its formulaic approach to.
And I'm definitely not alone, but
No.
Yeah, but you got to think about the new generations that are following behind. We're all getting old. There's younger generations coming up who are kind of new markets for this content, especially if it's memeable and translates well into, social media and mobile media forms. They're the sort of the new audiences. And also gaming, that's a huge audience. And so that crossover between cinema and gaming, of which Marvel is actually an example, is kind of quite strategic because there's whole audiences coming through, might not be engaging with a cinematic version of Marvel, but will be engaging with the gaming worlds.
Well, maybe it's part of that crossover with gaming, but does AI open up brand new formats, interactive films, for example, adaptive narratives, personalized episodes, things like that? There may be new types of television in particular, maybe not so much films, that will come to the fore as a result of AI.
Yeah, I mean, interactive cinema's an interesting one, and I think it came to the fore when Charlie Brooker put out Bandersnatch on Netflix, the idea of choosing a pathway through a narrative and maybe seeing as, oh, that's a new thing. But actually in cinema, that's been experimented with since the 60s. There was a film called Kino Automat where the audiences sat in the cinema and actually voted on which reel would be put in next, which direction would the film go in. And then again in the 1990s, there was a company called Interfilm who in America put kind of pistol grips on the seats where you could choose A, B or C, and you'd sit there and you could choose which way it would go. And as we mentioned before, it was a gimmick. I think there were 2 films that were released and then it just didn't take off.
which is kind of true of Bandersnatch as well.
Absolutely. This is what I'm saying. It's been tried and tried again, and it's just because you can. Should you? Will it be successful, or is it just a one-off experiment that's just kind of a marker in the sand of they tried this? So interactivity in cinema and film, screen media, hasn't really taken off. Obviously in gaming, where it's at the very kind of extreme end of that, it has, but these sort of choice points leave most of the audience unsatisfied because they didn't choose that.
But is that partly because actually watching films and TV is quite a passive experience, and people to some degree they like that passivity? They come home after a long day at work and they just want to put the telly on and sit on the couch, and they don't want to have to be like making decisions about this character's fate and what this character's going to do next and so on and so forth.
That's my sense with sort of, theatrical releases in cinema, that people do go to be absorbed in a room and, like you say, be completely immersed in a story world and not have to think. There was another experiment with mobile phones, a film called App, made in the Netherlands, which again was a really interesting experiment. It's everybody could take their phones in to the cinema, and then you downloaded this app which in the storyline reflected what was happening on the big screen. It was kind of infecting your phone and taking over, and so at key moments in the film your own phone would vibrate and there'd be all these instances, and it was really kind of interesting experiment, but that hasn't taken off mainstream. So I think The theatrical world of cinema and the home cinema viewing environment is all about absorption. And you can see that with bigger films being made, as in bigger, like IMAX release, bigger. They become more immersive. That's a big kind of trend with key filmmakers releasing on IMAX now, but also very long films. That's another thing. So making it a reason why you would go to the cinema and engage in the cinema for longer, but it's not about engaging with devices or, like you say, decision making. It's about being immersed in a world for longer.
But people do go into gaming, for example, to be immersed into that world and make decisions and so on. There is unquestionably a role for people who want to be entertained and sit back and eat their popcorn and that's it. Maybe there is also that role, like people get involved with chat bots, for example, which are constantly evolving as time goes on. If that sort of technology...
You mean romantically involved with chatbots?
Can be, yeah.
It does happen.
Yeah, it can be. So why wouldn't people, if AI is creating an image for them, it's the image that they want, and maybe that's a sort of new entertainment in its own right.
Yeah, absolutely. You see that in cinema and narratives as well. It's one area we've not really touched on, how storytelling is telling us stories about AI, and that's again been throughout the history of cinema. And the one that came to mind there was Spike Jonze's Her in 2013, which was really compelling and, talked about anxieties around that sort of human attachment to AI. But yeah, you can go back as far as 1927 to Fritz Lang's Metropolis and the idea of a robotic AI. And it was all about the fear of, what was coming, industrial kind of dehumanization, roboticization. So it's an interesting place to look for what might happen, the speculative narratives that we see in storytelling.
Okay. Do you think there's currently limits? Could we have a complete AI film at the moment, written, produced, created in AI?
Would it be any good?
Exactly. But yeah, would it be any good is the question to ask. Not, I think it's all there. The technology is all there to absolutely do what you've just described. But would we want to watch it?
Can you think of any examples where AI has been used to really enhance a film?
No, I can't, because I haven't, sort of specify, knowing where that's happened yet in films, sort of being aware of that. You can sort of, imagine theoretically how it could, but I couldn't give you an example at the moment, but I'm sure there are them if we look them up.
You have been involved in making some short films in the past, haven't you?
Yeah.
But am I right in thinking that they really predate when AI tools were available about 10 years ago or so?
Yeah, I've not used any AI in my own work, no.
If you were going to do another project, would you use AI now? And would it make them better?
And what aspects would you use it? What do you think are the most appropriate uses of it?
Yeah, well, at the moment I use AI when I'm formulating my own sort of ideas, how to organise a stream of consciousness around a certain issue. So I find it very useful for, refining my own thoughts and thinking into something that I can easily present and communicate to somebody else. And so it's very useful for writing short, policy pieces or summaries of my own work. But it tends to be based on all of my own work, my own writings of how I use that, so that it draws from my own, style and the points I've made, because I find it, if you put in a prompt with "write me this" in just a sentence, it's really, terrible and ineffective and
bland.
And bland, absolutely. So I think it's that using it as a creative partner mode, that instead of talking to a person, you're talking to an AI to help make your processes a bit more efficient in organising your ideas, thinking about how you might structure a narrative. So yeah, I think that's how I'm using it at the moment. So that would translate into how to make, short pieces of film. And I should say the work I make are sort of academic video essays. So it's a different way of making an academic argument through a film or short video.
It's fascinating stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's food for thought, isn't it? And it's all so now. We're trying to deal with it now. It's not like a historical thing that you can look back on. It's, things are changing as we speak.
So looking a bit further ahead, do you have any predictions about, say, in the mid-2030s, do you have any predictions about how the film industry might look different to how it does today and how AI will have impacted it in that way?
Yeah, I mean, it's a $1 million question, isn't it? I mean, it's how will it look in 3 months? The way that it's moving so quickly. So yeah, it's really hard to say, and whether AI will remain the kind of hot topic technology with quantum, on the way down the line as well, and what impact that might have. But certainly what we've seen is a real compression of times in evolution, looking back at how cinema has evolved, the timeframes are kind of getting shorter and shorter with a new kind of technological innovation. But it does take the industry a while to adopt to that, and to find the ways that are going to, like I say, sustain and be carried forth. Not everything, things will fall by the wayside, as gimmick, as novelty of, the technology can do that, but it's not going to be useful for this. So yeah, it's a really interesting question, but it will look very different.
But are we looking at a future of, in the near future of kind of mass job losses and maybe production staff just, in some ways, is Hollywood going to get a lot smaller?
Well, it's happening already, isn't it? That is happening with those in entry-level jobs. Obviously, we see that at the sharp end as a university entry-level jobs across the whole sector that involve technology are becoming few and far between. So the worry is, how are those individuals trained? How is the next generation able to access those industries when that layer has been cut out due to efficiencies? So there has to be thinking around that, how the workers of tomorrow are trained when we don't even know what the jobs will be and what will look like. So education has to be very nimble and adaptable, I think, over the coming years, to be able to respond to that, to be able to prepare, the talent of the future to be able to work within these domains when that's happened. But mass job losses, closures, and all of that is happening as a result already.
Well, a couple of points on that. One is, so what are you telling your students at King's at the moment? What advice are you giving them? What technical skills should they pursue, for example?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily technical skills, because we've learned training on a particular software or a platform isn't very helpful, because that's likely to change. It's more about the skills that an AI cannot do, and really foregrounding those in education, which are contextual intelligence, problem solving, team working, adaptability. So core skills that will be resilient in whatever the technology is, because it's about then how they will be able to respond to that. And training them to do things that AI cannot do and will never be able to do. Those sort of humanistic skills are what should be foregrounded, and accepting that it's an inevitability that these roles, jobs will go, and so that you have to think of different ways. And the education system overall probably needs an overhaul, because it isn't built to be that responsive and that adaptive. But these are the challenges as educators we have to face.
If we assume that the problem may lie with the technical jobs going forward, but there's still this, as far as I'm aware, it's unresolved, the dispute in Hollywood at the moment with the creatives as to what role AI plays in the storytelling and the acting side of things. How do you think that might resolve itself? Because there is that thing about people. If AI creates a story, is it created from large language models that are based on other people's stories? And obviously with acting, people have their own image rights. So do you perhaps see that those areas might be more protected and less vulnerable to AI, but the technical jobs are the ones that may go?
Yeah, I think so. And you saw, the outcome of the 2023 strike with the Writers Guild, which was also then the Actors Guild. And, the outcomes of that were really sort of positive in terms of having clear guardrails in place around how AI could be used as a writer, but it couldn't replace writing. Obviously, the Hollywood industry is heavily unionized, so people look to those structures for how that then might roll out across the world, because it's not so unionized in other countries where these things could be exploited potentially. So I think the sort of the actors' image rights is the next battle to be fought, I think, because that was very much about writing and script writing and the creation. And now, as you say, this is a very live debate where the legislative frameworks need to be kind of built to catch up.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe just as a last question, given all things that we've been discussing today, is AI a threat, or is it an opportunity for the future of the digital entertainment industry?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to say I sit on the fence, but I'm in between those points as an academic, looking at those extremes that we've mentioned. Fear on one side, this can't happen and we've got to stop it, because that's obviously not going to happen now that the genie is out of the bottle. And on the other side, this opportunity for experimentation, for democratization, and perhaps more towards that end, seeing what the opportunities can be to make, creativity a more productive, fruitful, enjoying, and, inclusive space that involves storytellers, creatives from across a whole range of backgrounds. So yeah, I would say there we have to be very cautious and wary, and we have to be critical and understand the data that these models are being trained on, and that being quite limiting and, potentially exploitative of creativity, but working with that in a positive, productive way to make the best of the tools and the opportunities to make creativity in the world a better place.
Well, that's kind of looking at it from an industry perspective. But if you look at it, going back to what Jack was saying, from a consumer perspective, are we going to end up with better digital entertainment, or is it going to be much more bland, perhaps?
I hope so. If it lands in the right hands, that's important, that it lands with creatives, with innovators, with visionaries, with different people with different stories to tell.
Well, we'll have to leave it there for this episode. Thank you very much, Sarah, for your time and your insights. And if you'd like to contact Sarah, you can do that through the King's College London website. And if you've enjoyed this E+T Off the Page podcast, there are plenty more on our website or the YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcast from. So for the time being, thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Hey listeners, here's a quick word about our sponsor, Xometry. They don't make parts, they make outcomes possible. That tiny component you're designing, it's more than a part. It's what powers satellites into orbit, pushes race cars to the limit, and even stabilizes surgical arms. From R&D to final production, Xometry gives you access to the world's manufacturing capacity, so every part, no matter the size, makes a real impact. Start your quote today at xometry.uk and see how one part can change everything.